at modeling again sort of from the ground up. But one of the things that I sort of wanted to press upon you, with any kind of digital asset creation software, you're never working with one piece of software. Now, this might seem daunting at first, but it's something that's very important for me to teach you, is how to utilize at least two pieces of software in sort of an asset creation pipeline. And it has to do with the fact that different tools have sort of different features that sort of complement each other. So we'll take a look at a classic relationship between Maya and ZBrush. And I think a lot of you might have a bit of an intake of breath, because it's like, I've never touched any 3D software. Now you're going to throw two of them at me at once. But I will try to, again, unfold a lot of concepts very, very slowly. So I've got Maya open currently. And I know I showed you what Houdini looks like and Cinema 4D and all that kind of stuff. They all look relatively the same. The only difference to what I said last class to 3D UI is ZBrush, because ZBrush does something completely different in terms of the way its UI looks and how it operates, and et cetera, et cetera. And I'll give you a complete introductory rundown to ZBrush and how ZBrush works underneath the hood much later. But the reason why ZBrush looks really, really different from any piece of software out there is because production tool. I think it was, I don't think it was created by the team at Weta Digital, but I think Weta Digital, did the most in terms of rounding the tool set out and adding features and plugins and things like that. So you'll notice that all software out there follows the standard Windows software structure. You know, I get your file, open, save, etc. You got your edit, cut, copy, paste. You know, the file and the edit menus are over on the left-hand side up at the top. You look at ZBrush, whoa, not really. We got alpha up at the top, brush, and it doesn't even look like a Windows UI, right? It looks completely different. The menu items are completely different from anything that you've ever seen before. So it's not like you could pick it up and intuitively run with it, right? So that's kind of the part of the issue of investigating ZBrush. But one of the reasons why it looks so different, again, it was built in production for artists in mind. That's the one thing that you got to understand. So as an artist, when I come in the morning, one of the first things I do when I get ready to work is I pick my alpha and I pick my brush. So you can see that the guys that initially started developing ZBrush were unafraid of saying, look, we're going to make the most artist-friendly tool. We're going to ignore what Windows tells us to do, and we're just going to create our own sort of structure for it. You know, so you can see that a lot of the menu items across the top are a little bit more sort of pipeline or workflow friendly for digital artists. But, you know, we'll get into that because you guys don't really have a workflow yet per se. You know, I know some of you are more experienced at 3D than others, but I would reckon that you're probably still sort of trying to figure out your own personal workflow, right? So here is how this works, right? So if I come in, I'm just going to really quickly create a polygon primitive sphere, and I'm doing this improperly because I haven't set myself up properly, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a sec. If we come in here, right, we've got, I can right click and I can pick vertices, and we've covered this last class, I can move them around, right? I can come in here, hit the B key, get a soft select tool, which is like massive at the moment. So let's bring that down. And I got a soft select tool, so I can get into ZBrush. I'll come down here. You know, actually, let's go in and grab the sphere, right? And I can come in here. Now, ZBrush is different because I don't work with vertices. I come in through Make Polymesh 3D. I come through and just sort of sculpt on it. Like, right? So I can pick a variety of different brushes. I can pick, you know, like a clay brush is quite good. Subdivide this guy up a little bit, you know, and it's more like working with like a clay material or some kind of tactile material, right? So the experience of modeling inside of ZBrush is very, very similar to how you would approach sculpture, Whereas if you take a look at that complex shape, I got there relatively quickly. Doing that inside of Maya, I would, again, have to like, it would take me a little bit of time to get to this kind of similar sort of idea, right? I'd have to come through here, and then I have to subdivide some more, and on and on and on. It would take me about 10 times longer to get to this shape inside of Maya and instead of inside of ZBrush. So we generally in tandem. Now, why not work exclusively in ZBrush, right? Well, up until a few years ago, the reason why we would probably jump back and forth is that the way Maya is structured for hard body modeling and polygonal modeling was a lot easier for architectural modelers to kind of dive in and do some stuff. I know ZBrush had flatten brushes and smoothing brushes and hard surface brushes and things like that, but it was just a lot easier for architects and CAD-based designers to work. Like, let's just say you're doing a Gothic cathedral. It was a lot easier to do it inside of Maya. Until the advent of the ZModeler brush, which I will talk a little bit about today. So the ZModeler brush, I think it's about 4 or 5 years old now. But with the introduction of the ZModeler brush, I now no longer do any modeling inside of Maya. So why am I teaching Maya, and why am I teaching the relationship between Maya and ZBrush? Well, to approach the fundamentals, and you need to understand what you're doing and what you're experiencing inside a 3D context. ZBrush keeps a lot of that hidden, right? Or they've got advanced functionality where you don't necessarily need to pay attention to, things like lamina faces or, any other political artifacting. You don't have to pay attention to it as much inside of a ZBrush, but you can bet it's still there and it'll still come to haunt you. So oftentimes I will sort of begin inside of Maya. As well, a lot of the tried and true techniques in Maya in terms of projection modeling and things like that are transferable. So if you end up inside of something like Nuke and you're doing 3D compositing, there's a lot of the language and the workflow that you're used to inside of Maya that transfers over when working inside of the 3D space inside of Nuke. It's much easier to build on your Maya knowledge and go into Houdini than going from ZBrush into Houdini, which would be a little bit more difficult. So there's a lot of different factors going on. I'll tell you something, just a little bit of background. So when I first got into 3D, there was packages like Lightwave and things like that. And if you installed Lightwave, you'd have like 4 different modules. You'd have an animation module, a modeling module, like the rendering module, and you have to run them like separate applications and open them. And it was just a nightmare. At the time, everybody was clamoring for an all-in-one package, and the 3D Studio guys came around and said, look, you can do everything inside of 3D Studio R4. Right? So you can do your rendering, modeling, animating, everything inside one package. And everyone's like, woo, okay, that's the way to go. So Softimage came out and Maya came out, and it was all sort of kept in one package. You could quite literally go inside of Maya, do all your work, and then right up until rendering for the compositor, not touch another piece of software, right? Unfortunately, technology and CG technique and sort of the discovery and invention of quite a few different simulation engines have made all-in-one packages like Maya large and unwieldy, right? So now, after a good sort of 20 years, digital artists are looking at specialized software again. So, if I'm creating a character in Maya, I might do the digital sculpting in ZBrush, I might rig and animate in Motion Builder, etc., because at this state of technology, it's a lot easier to run a specialized piece of software because the response time is quicker, calculations are quicker, it's a lot easier to manage. That package is specifically designed for that task, so it just makes it a lot easier. Okay, so let's start off by, I'm going to minimize ZBrush, and we'll connect to ZBrush in just a second. I'm just going to pop to Maya, and we'll start again with a clean scene, right? So there are a few things that I want to set up straight off the bat before I dive in. right? The first thing I'm going to do is I am going to set up my world. Because let's look at that world right now, right? Keep in mind, we're trying to create something that's believable and realistic. Excuse me. So my question to you is, how big is that grid? Any thoughts? You guys all must be as tired as I am today. Okay. I'm hoping you guys are watching. Well, we're streaming, so drop frames detected 56% over the last 2 minutes. Is my signal getting through to you guys okay?
I see it.
Yeah, all right.
I do see the thing, yes. My micronet works, sorry.
Oh, okay. Oh, you know what? I just realized my Twitch stream is just not on the right tutorial display. One quick sec while I switch that over. Sheesh. Rank amateur here or what? All right, so there's my Maya screen. That's cool. We're just starting off at the top anyway. All right, so this world, we do not know how big it is. And that's kind of dangerous, right? And it's professionals used to make this mistake quite a lot, actually, back in the early days. One of the biggest things to bite us in terms of pipeline was scale, right? So it got to the point where at the onset of every project, we would have a big team meeting between the animators, modelers, technical artists, everybody, so we would determine what scale we were working in, right? Because I don't know how many times a modeler would work on this character and you bring it in and it'd be like, yay, big inside of Maya. And none of the dynamics would work because the world units were off and, it's all crazy. Because it happens quite easily because if I come in here, right, and I'm working on this, right, I'm just like, oh yeah, woo, this is like a flying pig dude, I think, and it's huge, and I'm just going to attach a piece of string to it, it's going to fly around and all kinds of stuff. And then you bring it in here and it's the size of a 1p coin. That's not good, right? And you can't tell inside of here how big that object is. Right? So we need to set those types of boundaries relatively early. So to do this, you open up Maya and you head over into Windows, Settings, Preferences, and Preferences, right? So you get this Preferences window, right? And usually the defaults are pretty good, but it's a wonderful habit to get into that the first thing you do when you engage in a new project is to check your Maya preferences. There's only one menu item you need to check. It's this one called Settings. Now this used to freak me out back in the day because I could never find settings. Because if you look, these just look like subheadings. They don't look like you could actually click on them. So I was like, oh, okay, under settings, I got animation assets. Where can I set my world settings? I couldn't find it. And then just by accident, I was like, oh, there it is. It's on the word itself, right? So you click on that, and there are a few things that you want to set. Number one, you want to set your world up y-axis. And this is unnecessarily, but unfortunately, it's one of those things we have to deal with. The majority of the CG world, I think, is y-up, right? And that has to do with right-hand or left-hand coordinate systems. It's a concept in math. You don't have to worry about it, right? But there's this idea that the z-axis is actually representational of up. Well, I'm sort of used to the y-axis being up. The two pieces of software where the z-axis is up, can you guys tell me? Some of you may know. Tumbleweeds, holy cow. Okay, so 3D Studio Max. That has a Z-up coordinate system. And Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine has a Z-up coordinate system. So that poses a little bit of problem sometimes. So if we come in here and we set Z-up axis, we know that when we work in tandem with Unreal Engine, everything will be fine. All the characters will be oriented correctly. You won't get characters coming in lying on their back. right? That sort of a thing. The other is, what working units do you want to work in? Centimeters or meters? So to make sense of this, because you look at that and go, I don't know, centimeters, I guess. To make sense of this, we also have to open up the second area that you guys need to set, which is the display and then the grid, right? Which is this guy here in the viewport. So we're going up to display and grid, and then we're going to go over here to the right to the option box and open this guy up, right? So here's a trippy thing, mess with your head a little bit, right? We got length and width 12 units. Grid lines every 5 units. What are those units? Anybody know? There was an attempt at activating a mic. Okay, that's cool. Here it is. They are centimeters. If you're thinking centimeters, you're right. But if I come over here and click this to meters, it's 12 units by 12 units. What are those units? Now they're meters. And you can see the grid has adjusted because of that. So we got a 12 meter by 12 meter grid. Right? This is an important concept because Maya and Unreal both do this. They give you Maya units and Unreal units. The heck is that? Well, it's basically saying these units can be whatever you want. Whatever you want. We promise we'll mathematically, work it out for you. So all you have to do is set the initial unit, and then we'll take care of the math behind the scenes. So that's where this preferences becomes very, very important. Because you can see it's a radical difference between the centimeter setting and the meter setting. And we haven't even changed anything on our grid display, right? So let's leave it at centimeters now. A little tidbit of information for you guys. What's better, centimeters or meters? Well, here's the confusing thing. A lot of sort of real-time tech, like the human IK skeleton and things like that, they operate better under centimeters, right? The nucleus framework and any kind of physics-based simulation works better under meters. So go figure. I generally choose centimeters or meters based on the kind of game that I'm making, right? So if you're working on a first-person shooter, you're going to see a lot of detail in the guns, so you probably want to go centimeters. If you're working on a third-person game, massive worlds, it might behoove you to go to meters. But irregardless, we do now need to set up our grid units to figure out the world that we're in. So that's all we need to set here for preferences. So we can close that guy up. And we're going to go into the grid options here. So we've got 12 centimeters by 12 centimeters. That's not good enough for me, right? So I probably want, something like 1,000 by 1,000. Let's apply that. That's a nice, great, big, huge grid, right? Now, under here, I can color the axes black for my world 000. That's important because we always model at world 000. And I will be constantly telling you guys that. Always model at world 000. And I'll show you examples of why. So we've got a nice black grid to remind us where world 000 is. We can actually add perspective grid numbers, right? Do you see what I did there? Just clicked it on axes and apply, and then we can see our grid spacing here. I'm going to leave that on because it might be easier for us to understand the next few steps. So we got 1,000 by 1,000. So where do we want to draw grid lines, right? And then that's the next color down here, grid lines. And you can see I've got that set to blue, right? Because if I were to draw grid lines for, I'm going to set this guy to 1, just for now. Oops, 1. If I were to draw grid lines every single centimeter, look at that. Whoa, we get like a really, really dense grid, right? So I know I want to work with centimeters, but I don't want to necessarily see centimeters in the grid, right? So let's back it up a step and say, look, give me a solid blue line every 100 centimeters. That's cool. I know that that's a meter, right? Okay, cool. So that's a meter and that's a meter. So even though I've set it at centimeters unit, I can see per meter, right? So that's cool. I'm ready to go there. But you know, what if I'm creating a guy and he's like 177 centimeters tall, right? And I've got my grids at meters. I might need something else to kind of help me measure the height of my main character, right? That's where the subdivisions come in. And then you can see down here, subdivisions lines, the color for it. This one really messes me up because the subdivisions here doesn't have a unit. It's just asking, look, you've got a meter by meter square. How do you want me to cut it up? That's all it's asking, right? So I'll give you an example. I can say, look, cut it up evenly, right? And 2, boom, we've got something we can understand, right? So we know that this is probably 50 centimeters and that's 50 centimeters, right? But we can even go, you know what? Cut it up into 3 pieces. Oh, that's messing with my head a bit because that's like 0.333333 whatever. So with subdivisions, it'll subdivide it in whatever unit you want. You can make 7 subdivisions, but it just doesn't make no sense to you at all, right? So I try to kind of give it something reasonable, right? So I say, look, it's 100 centimeters by 100 centimeters. I don't want to see every single centimeter. Maybe every 10 centimeters or so, show me a grid line. That's kind of cool, right? And then I know that these are decimeters, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100. That will be easy to work with, right? Because I can divide everything by 10 and it's all fine. This is a nice grid. Now, default, all the grid lines come colored gray. Unfortunately, I have this set up already. But I try to make the subdivision lines a very, very faint gray because I don't really need it. And I try to give the grid lines every 100 centimeters a nice bold color, but one that doesn't kind of get in the way when I'm working, right? So these are the colors that I like. And then I've got the grid line numbers and everything's cool. So that is a good grid setup ready to go, right? So that's the first thing that you need to set up when you get inside of Maya is all of your working units. The second thing you need to set up is your file system. I know this stuff is really dry, but it's sort of important. The second thing you need to set up is where you're going to store your project files. And I'll get into this by walking you through setting up a project, right? So up until now, software that you've worked with, whether it's Photoshop or Medibang Paint Pro or what have you, iMovie Maker, you've always dealt with a file that you open, a file that you save, etc. And it's just one file you carry with you everywhere, your PSD file or what have you. Maya does not work that way. No other 3D software works that way, right? So I'll show you. If we come in here and we go to File and we want to create a new scene, that's the wrong way to go about it. Right? I shouldn't say wrong. It's a way that will be very difficult to work with later on down the line. So when you go up to the file, first thing you want to do is come over and open up your project window. And I'll show you why. When Maya, or when you start creating a scene inside of Maya, Maya needs to know where to find stuff and connect it up together. The easiest thing to sort of start off with is looking at scene assembly, autosave. Let's make this easy. You guys can wrap your heads around a little bit, right? So yeah, let's bring back source images. So we want to create a folder structure that's got a folder called scenes and a folder called source images. The reason why is because we want to keep our Maya scenes in one folder and our textures in another. And I'll talk to you about textures a little bit more as we go on, right? So I'm telling Maya, look, create a project for me, create 2 folders for me, the scenes folder and the source images folder, right? I'm going to create a new project. Oh, okay, let's do this again. I wasn't expecting to auto-populate. That's all right. Just get rid of these guys. You will need quite a few of those folders a little bit later on, but you don't need them now. Right? So for this, where do you want to save your project? Now, a lot of people save it under their C users documents Maya projects folder, right? The problem with that though is that you are saving to whatever local hard drive your computer, the computer you're sat at now. So that might be good when you're at home, but when you're at the uni and you can't really access it, right? So what I recommend, and I'll talk to you about setting up cloud drives to make life a little bit easier, but for now what I recommend is you navigate towards your USB drive, right? So I've got a few different drives here. Let's head on over to my projects drive. That's my USB drive, and I plugged it in and I've assigned it the drive letter D, right? So I'm gonna pop in here and I'm gonna go to projects. Actually, I know what I do because I got some freelance work that I'm doing, so I might as well set that up while I'm here. So I'm gonna pop into my cloud drive. This is my Google Cloud Drive, and I'm gonna head into my live action folder. I think I've got Discovery of Witches in here. Yeah, that's cool. Go into development folder. I got my content, and inside my content folder, I'm going to create a folder called environment. And in here, I'll select that location. So what I'm telling Maya is go to this location and then create your project folders, right? And I'll show you what that does. So I'm selecting that location. So Maya says, okay, I will do everything you want in this location. What do you want to call the project, right? So I'm going to call this set congregation, right? And then 01 on the end, just in case there's variants of it, right? So that's it. That's all I've set. The set one, the congregation, that's the name of my project. It's going into my environment folder because it's the set for the congregation. And I'm going to create a scenes and a source images folder and hit accept, right? So it's going to go through and it's going to save that off. Come on, man. The disadvantage of mapping your cloud drive to a drive letter mapping inside your computer is that it's reliant on streaming, so it doesn't save the fastest. In the meantime, I am going to open up that location here so I can show you what's going on, right? So after all that's said and done, if we pop into here, into my content environment, that's what we get, right? Set congregation 1, and we've got a few additional support folders that Maya has created. Don't worry about that. We've got our scenes folder and we've got our source images folder. There are reasons why these other folders exist. So for example, Maya has a time editor, so Maya automatically creates a time editor folder. There's render data is automatically created because when you're rendering, Maya needs someplace to put the renders and so on and so forth. So there are a few minimum folders that Maya needs to create automatically, irregardless of what you choose, right? But these are the ones that are important to me. The scenes folder and the source images. The source images is where I'm going to stash my textures. Now, let's start by saving a dummy file. So I'm going to come in here and file save scene as, and I'll call this Rotunda. Now I'm going to save that in here as a default so that we can talk a little bit about this. Okay, so inside here, now I've saved the Maya scene file, right? There it is. So we've got this Maya binary file. Now here's why I'm walking you through this whole thing. Students will invariably do this, and you guys will do it. I know. I've tried to warn people years and years and years. I've been doing this, and still somebody does this. They'll take that home, right? They go, "There's my scene," right? I'll put it in my USB drive. I'll take it home, pop it inside their laptop at home. Open up Maya. Sometimes it works. Majority of the time, it doesn't, right? Because inside this scene file, which you will see a practical example of in just a second, if I apply a texture to it, I say, okay, Maya, that texture is in my source images folder, right? So imagine Maya's surprise when you take that scene file home, you've only got this, you try to open it at home, and Maya's looking for set 1, congregation 1 in the environment folder, source images, 3D paint textures. Where's that folder, man? Can't find it, right? So it just chucks black onto your object. And then you're just like, oh my God, what's wrong with my 3D object? Al! And you're desperately typing in Discord, I broke my 3D object. Well, this happens all the time. This is the more common link to break. It's called a texture link, right? So how do you prevent that? Well, I went through this whole rigmarole to show you about the project, just to let you know that when you go home, or when you take your scene file from place to place, you do not take just the scene file, you take the entire project folder and everything in it, right? You copy that whole project folder, paste it into your USB key, and then you're good. You're okay. I mean, there's drive pathing, but we'll talk about that later. My point being is all the assets that you need for your scene will be grouped together in this nice, convenient folder package, right? And you'll never be at a loss. Right? So those are the two things that I always cover at the beginning of any kind of Maya session. Number one, make sure your units and your preferences are set up inside your workspace so that you don't run into any weird anomalies or strange kind of errors. And second, make sure you've got your project set up so that you have what are called your dependencies or your links working properly, right? Everything's kind of saved in one spot. Maya knows where to find everything, right? Okay, so any questions about that? Okay, cool. Hopefully, I'm just going to take a quick look, make sure that my closed captioning is working. I think it was in Stream Manager. Yeah, let's refresh that window and see if it's working. Yeah, looks like I got closed captioning turned on. Stream closed captioner. Any of you guys tuned into my stream on Twitch? Oh, there we go. Yeah, okay. So the closed captioning is working. That's all right. There was a little delay, I guess. Come in here and create a polygon primitive plane. And maybe I'll take that width and the height. Now, these units are now centimeters, right? Because remember, we set it to centimeters, right? So 100 centimeter by 100 centimeter, that's my 1 meter square. So in here, I'll also take those subdivisions, or how many times that object's divided, and I'm going to bring that down to 1, right? So we can start talking a little bit about this object. So I'm going to grab this guy and bring him up a little bit. Talk about some of the characteristics of this object. Now, I talked to you guys briefly about the fact that this is like folding paper, right? So if I was just like, oh yeah, okay, I want to make a shape like this, and then you're kind of like, oh, okay, I sort of want to bend it or change it. You need to add more fold lines so you can fold it sort of appropriately. But this very, very simple object is called a quad. And I want to talk to you about the behavior of the quad because it's really important. So if I lift this up like this, right? Notice that I'm trying to make it artifact, but it's not artifacting, which is good, right? Let me see if, let's move this over this way. Just trying to make it artifact, but it's not doing it for me. So what ends up in the package, right, is pulling the quad up a little bit. see if we can get it. Trying to make it deliberately happen, but it's not happening, which is all right. All right. What sometimes will happen, and you'll notice that, we see the fold line going through here, don't we, eh? Sometimes when you're rotating around, the fold will boom, pop up here and fold the other way, right? So you see the edge of the polygon draw straight across this way and fold the other way. Because Maya does not know where you want to bend that quad. Has no idea, right? So generally, a graphics engine will just do what's called tri-stripping based on what it thinks you want, right? And when you get into 3D modeling, you do not want the computer modeling anything that it thinks you want. You want to be explicit and tell it exactly what you want, right? So this is important because it dovetails with the two concepts. Number one, try to always model in quads, and quads means 4 edges, 4 vertices, 2 triangles. Basic unit, right? And I'll show you that. You'll see that when we get into it. And always try to make that quad planar, right? I mean, it's not entirely possible all the time. Sometimes you get a little bit of twist and torque. But what you want to avoid is you want to avoid like stuff like that, right? You can see it's like artifacting like crazy. It's turning black all of a sudden. That'll happen no matter what texture or color or anything you put on it. It'll just go black. And you don't want that because, you know, that looks crappy on a movie screen or a TV screen, right? You also want to avoid like big, long triangles. And again, that has to do with the way 3D objects are rendered and things like that, right? So there's a couple of things to kind of watch out for. Remember I told you that a polygon is made up of 4 edges, 2 triangles, 4 vertices, and 1 normal, right? So the normal is the direction that that polygon is facing. So I'll give you in just a second, right? So just as a refresher, when I right click on this object, I've got all the sub objects. I can pick the vertices, I can pick the edges, right? I can right click and I can pick the faces, right? And in this case, it's grabbing the entire quad, right? Or I can right click and I can go into object mode, and you tell you're in object mode by the bright green line around stuff, and that just means you're going to grab the whole thing as a single object, right? Now, the normal you can't see until I come over into my display, polygons, and where are you now? Face normals. Face normal, right? Oh, the face normal is tiny. So I'm going to come over back to polygons, face normals, normal size, and let's crank that right up so we can see what it is we're looking at. Oh. Okay. Okay, see that arrow? I'm going to darken the background by using Alt-B, which stands for alternate background. So I'm going to alternate that background so it goes dark so we can see exactly what I'm trying to show you here, right? So that green line says that, look, only one side of this polygon is renderable, right? So now I'll switch to like a physical metaphor that I think works really, really well, right? When you are engaged with any kind of digital model, your stream is still running, okay. When you're dealing with any kind of digital modeling software, this is your model, right? It could be anything, right? It could be a model car, model weapon, whatever, right? Now, what's typical of this is that the inside is just plain cardboard. It's pointless to us. There's nothing inside it. So if we were to box as beautiful as we can, we would never fold the box out like this because that ugly gray cardboard is facing the world, right? So this is a polygon object, and the positive normals are on all sides of this box, and therefore the texture looks beautiful facing the audience, right? So again, understand that no matter what kind of 3D object we make, the interior of the 3D object will be no good to us, right? will sometimes render black, but it's just a non-renderable surface. And there are ways of cheating it, but I don't want to talk about that. So that's our 3D object. This is our texture, right? This is our texture, which we will use in terms of kind of UV wrapping, right? So when we have a photograph and we want to kind of put it on a 3D object, this is what we get, right? And it's flat, right? This represents a 2D planar surface that we will be projecting onto the box, right? And as you can see with the wrapping paper, it has a positive normal and a negative. So we never want this side of the wrapping paper ever to be revealed to the audience, right? Now the big trick about texturing is we want to be able to wrap this around the box with no seams, right? Because we're trying to recreate the real world, right? And in the real world, let's say I'm modeling a human forearm. There's no seam in the forearm, right? It's just one continuous piece of texture, right? So if I were to wrap this box, I'd want to be able to hide the seam, right? So where would you put it, right? So oftentimes we might put that seam sort of on the bottom of the box, right? And try to make it look nice and neat. If we were to tape it up, we would maybe put the whole wrapping paper here, and then maybe tape up the back. So, it's just sort of hidden from view, right? So that's nice and easy when it comes to trying to do a box. Let's take this and try to wrap this, right? Then it becomes a whole heap more technical. Those of you who wrapped a mug or a glass as a Christmas present know what I'm talking about, right? Trying to make this look nice and neat, right? So imagine trying to wrap this around here. Where would you hide the seams, right? How would you get around the handle? Well, obviously we're gonna have to cut a separate piece for the handle. Well, we can cut a separate piece so that we wrap it around the handle, and maybe the seam is on the inside of the handle. Maybe the seam is around the base of the handle, right? One thing we cannot do is we cannot scrunch this up, right? First of all, if you scrunch up wrapping paper, it looks completely ugly, right? So you try to smooth it out and make it as flat as possible, right? Second kind of point about scrunching up your texture, also scrunching up your model, is that it will also lead to some crazy, weird artifacts and effects. So here's what I'm talking about. Let's say I got this and I just want to sort of drive it kind of maybe through the object like that. And I'm going to hit Alt-B to find an alternate background so you guys can see what I'm dealing with, right? This is what happens, right? See the flashing black? That's the artifacting because the PC doesn't know, the render engine doesn't know how to render that surface. It's like, man, I'm confused. I don't know what you want me to show the world, right? So this has a lot to do with laying the foundation for, right? And the reason why I go to such lengths to talk about project setup and clean modeling techniques is not, again, it's not because I'm excessively anal, not by any stretch of the means. It's because working with computer graphics is so exacting. If you make a mistake, it'll lead to headache after headache after headache for you as you try to figure out what's wrong. And you'll run into that if you haven't already, right? Things that have gone disastrously wrong and you have no clue why. You animate a character and then you press play and the character just sort of explodes and you're like, what? I didn't do that. So there are these rules that you need to follow when you're creating a 3D object, and I'll hopefully try and walk you guys through it. Okay, so any questions about that? I'm trying to only reveal a little of these technical sort of considerations at a time, and then trying to dive into a little bit more of a practical exercise. Is everyone good? Everyone's here. Okay. Okay. Perhaps I should have started with an anime YouTube clip today, hey? All right, so let's start off with our first kind of project. What we're going to do is we're going to model a sort of box-like shape, right? So I'm going to, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to, let's just open up a new window here. This is a website you guys might want to bookmark because it's awesome and you'll use it a lot. www.textures.com. Right? This is a library of textures that have been prepped, prepared, and processed for work in CG and visual effects and animation and modeling, etc. The other website, that's like this enormous database of textures, is 3DSK. We use this heavily at Electronic Arts. So 3DSK is just the go-to for professional artists. Unfortunately, this one costs money, right? They started to put up 3D scans too. That's really right. So whereas the textures.com is free, right? Well, you get a limited number of downloads per day, but it's never been anything that's ever affected me. I've never had to pay at all to join this site. I'll show you how it works. So if I were to come in here and say, I don't know, let's grab an object texture. Oh, here, I'll kind of walk you through this. So one of the things I like about textures.com is the categories. They're very, very intuitive. They make sense. You know, got animals, bricks, buildings, concrete, doors. It's just logically separated. And I find that it's very much in tune with the way I think, right? And then you can blow these guys up and it breaks it down even further, right? So the way this is cataloged is just really, really super helpful for me to find stuff in a pinch, right? So I cannot recommend it enough. It is like the best texture library that I've ever encountered. Unless you guys know of any others that maybe I haven't heard of yet. So we're going to pop in here and we're going to look at, let's take a look at some man-made objects. And let's take a look at, I'm always making oil drums. I'm going to think of something different. Again, the boxes are a good place to start. So I just want to get something simple, but with a little bit of complexity to it. Let's see if there's anything here. Cargo props would be cool. Let's take a look. You know what? I think the best thing to do is a building, because then we can talk about a few different things with that. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so no, I just realized, because a lot of these textures are built for projection and facade modeling, which I didn't want to deal with today. Well, I'm just going to grab any box, just a box. Why am I making this far more difficult than it needs to be? I swear to God. Okay, so man-made again, and we'll go in anything. Let's just grab that. That's too challenging. Let's try this one. It's got a piece that we can discuss in a second. Okay, so here's how this particular site works, right? Okay, cool. You have a certain number of free credits that you can cash in, and you can see you can get up to a medium-sized image, like 1200 by 1600, which is good enough for, right? And then you can pay for the premium, and you get like 4K textures, which is cool. But I never really need anything that big, right? So I'm actually going to grab the smallest resolution for this guy because, well, I'll show you why. So I'm going to grab this guy. And so remember we created our project folder, right? So let's go find our project folder, which I created in on my cloud drive under TV, live action, discovery, which is development, content, environment, and in my source images folder, what I generally like to do is come here and create another one called raw. And I'll put raw downloaded textures. Now, there are two choices for you guys. One, you can create your library of textures inside your project that you're going to use for your project. But as you get more advanced, you'll start thinking, well, why don't I have a global library of textures that I can access at any time? And as I build projects, I can build up my library of textures and put it on a Google Drive. That would be sort of pipeline thinking, right? So that means when I grab these box textures, they'll be in a category called box, and I can access them anywhere for any project that I might endeavor to do in the future. So I'm going to just grab that. I'm only going to grab, I don't want to grab all of this. So let's grab, let's grab this one. Oh, excuse me. And let's just do the sides and the top. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. I'll grab this guy, and I'll grab the bottom. The handle is a whole other issue that we'll sort of discuss in a second. I think they're downloading. Let's just click on all these guys. Yep, there's just a bit of a delay. All right, so I'm going to download these guys. But I'm also going to come over here to Google because I want to demonstrate an issue, right? A problem with the way we might approach this box modeling. Oh no, wooden box. Let's go wooden box. Okay. Okay, so let's see if I can find. Trying to find one that's got some lighting value on it. Okay. Yeah, let me yeah, oh, that's a CG box. I guess it doesn't matter. I'll just grab the CG box. So I'm going to open this image in a new tab, and we'll right click and save this image, right? Okay, so we've got our texture set up and kind of ready to go, right? So here's what I want to do, right? Let's come in here and create a box, right? Now this is what I generally tend to see quite a bit with a lot of people who are attempting modeling for the very first time, right? So they go, okay, we create a box. It's like that. It's a cube, right? And then I'll just stretch it up. And they'll go, oh, okay, cool. It's a box. And I think it's about that big, right? Do you see the problem with how I'm approaching this modeling? Any suggestions what I should do? Okay, I will carry on. Okay, I'm making these arbitrary decisions, the size of the box, and it's not going to work out when I put my texture on this box, right? So I want to make sure that I'm building this towards something, right? So first of all, I want to make sure that I'm at world 000. Now, when you did notice, my object came in like this, right? So I want to make sure that it sits on top of the world. Well, how can you do this? Well, I can come over here, hit the space bar, go to my orthographic views, right? So here's my top view, right? It's dead center. Here's my front view, and then my side view. And I can come in here and then just look at my grid line. That's like grab the arrow and then just try to line it up. But then when you go in there really close, man, I can't, where's that arrow? How can I line it up to the grid line? Because I can see, whoa, when I zoom in, it's a little bit off. And I want it to be perfect. Well, Maya knows that sometimes when you have the move tool and you zoom in, you don't have access to the move tool. So Maya provides a way of controlling your object called gesturing. Means if I hold the shift middle mouse button and I gesture in the direction I want to go, Maya will say, okay, that looks 90% like you want to do the y-axis. I'll just move it on the y-axis, right? So I can button, gesture in and out, right? So that's helpful when you need to line an object up and your gizmo's and it'll obey the gesture of the direction you want to go in. So that's a little bit of a navigational tidbit. But let's prep this model properly. What I want to do is I want to be able to lock it to world 0, 0, 0, know that it comes in, and snapping's hugely helpful. I resisted snapping for the longest time because, I'm a character artist, character sculptor, and anything that has any type of exactitude, my body just rebels against. Things like that, and understood how valuable and wonderful snapping is, right? So we're going to set this object up properly. Now, I want to snap it to the world. So Maya comes built with 3 snapping functions. Let me, actually, what I'll do is I will, just for an example, I'll create a sphere over here, and I'll come in and create just a circle. I'll pop this guy over here. So Maya comes with snapping functions that are tied to 3 hotkeys, X, C, and V, right? Now, the X key will snap to the grid. So when I hold down the X key and I move the middle mouse button, you see it's snapping to all the grid points? Now, I remember that it's X because X kind of looks like a grid, so that's cool. C, the C key is a snap to a curve, E for curve, and then the V key is snap to a vertex. So if I hold down V, middle mouse button drag, my object will snap to a vertex. See how useful snapping is? So X, C, and V are the 3 next hotkeys that I learned, right? So after the initial W, E, and R, which is move, rotate, and scale, then the X, C, and V for snapping, right? So that's cool. I'm going to get rid of the curve, and I'm going to get rid of the sphere. Right. So how do we get this guy over to the grid? Well, I can hit W, and I can X snap this. I don't have to drag it. I can just sort of wiggle, middle mouse button wiggle over the middle, and it'll just find it, right? Actually, there's a lot of cool things about Maya. I don't realize. I haven't been in Maya for a couple of years, but I'm being reminded of how some of the smaller features are quite cool and help me model really, really quickly. Now, how do we know that that's, like, we're sort of guessing that that's in the middle of the world, right? Well, we have different ways of viewing that object under the shading menu, right? So right now, it's smooth shading the entire object, right? But I can switch over to wireframe. In the wireframe mode, it's like, oh yeah, okay. Yeah, I can see. It's pretty much right there in the world, right? But sometimes it's hard to see with all those lines kind of getting in the way, right? So sometimes you can switch over to smooth shade all, but you can turn on X-ray mode. So it's lightly shading the box. So you can see the box, a little bit more solidly, right? But this is an industry convention, right? So let me show you what industry convention is, right? So first of all, we need to get this guy up here. There's a few different things we can do. First of all, we want to move that pivot, right? So what is that pivot? Well, the pivot is this guy in the middle. It's saying that that is the center of the object, right? Well, let's move that. Hit the insert key. My little gizmo turns into that, right? So I can move this over here, right? And check this out. When I hit the insert key again, right? And then I'm rotating, boom, it's rotating from around there, right? So this is a handy way of moving that pivot point to another location. But what we want to do is we want to be exact, right? And hit the insert key. Well, guess what? The X, C, and V keys, they work here as well. So I've hit the C key and middle mouse button drag, and it's attached itself to the line. I can X middle mouse button, and it's attached itself to a grid point there. I don't know when you would need this, but if you need it, it's there, right? So I can rotate it from a grid point, right? I'll hit the insert key to get to my pivot, and I'll hold down V and middle mouse button and snap it to the vertex. It's right there on the vertex. This is industry convention, right? So now I've got that there. Now, I've hit the insert to come out of pivot point mode, so I'm moving the object. Now when I hold the X key and middle mouse button drag, I can snap it to the middle. Now when I hold the X key and middle mouse button drag, I can snap it to the middle there. And I know it's perfectly aligned to world 000, right? So why is this industry convention? Well, let's just say that this is a building, right? So first of all, my scale works nice, because check it out. With the pivot down there, when I scale, I know that it's just going to go straight up and down, right? So it's handy for making a real quick building, right? It's not going to, if my pivot point was sort of located in the middle, it'd be scaling like this, and you wouldn't have control over it. So it's nice to control because it's on the ground, right? But also, it makes it super handy if I needed to kind of place buildings, like if I were to build a city street, or if I were building a bunch of barricades, right? With that there, I can just simply V-snap this guy to the last thing, Control D, move this guy out, and then I can come over here and I can V-snap this to there, etc., etc. So really quickly, I can make all these objects align together. Now, I rushed through that. So this is why this has become industry convention, not for everybody, but for a lot of game studios. They work this way with building props and things like that, right? So with that in place, now we're ready to kind of tackle modeling this box and trying to figure out what we want to do. But before we do that, I'm going to get this back down to box size. Ooh, I've created two of them. There we go. Let's get this down to box size, and I'll show you how texturing works, okay? So I'm going to come back out of X-ray mode so I can see my object. A little cheat here for you as well, right? So we've gone through and done the X-ray mode, but the X-ray mode is, you know, just, it's one consistent sort of thing, right? I'm going to come over into my attribute editor down here, right? And it shows, okay, I've got my cube, I've got the transform node, and then the shader group, and then the material. Lambert 1. Never use Lambert 1. Always assign, right? You guys know why you never use Lambert 1? Like somebody was activating their mic. 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 Never used Lambert 1. Pfft. What's wrong with Lambert 1? I'm going to come over here. I clicked on the checkerboard icon for my Lambert to put something in the color channel. Let's just put a checkerboard on there, right? So I'm going to put a checkerboard on there. That's cool. I can't see it. It's like, I thought I put a checkerboard on there. Well, I got to go up to my menus and turn on hardware texturing before it appears, right? Cool. I got a checkerboard cube, right? What does Al know? Now I'm going to start building my object. I'm going to bring in a cube. I'm going to bring in a sphere, and oh, damn, cone. Oh, no. They've all got checkerboards on them, right? Maya needs Lambert 1 to color every object you create, right? It's reserved it. So you can use Lambert 1 if you want, but it'll apply Lambert 1 to absolutely everything that you create from there on in. So never, ever use it. That's just the best way to go. So I'm going to back up to where I've got that Lambert, right? So how do I get rid of this? You saw me go into the color channel and sort of click on this thing and, you know, go through the file nodes. Don't worry if I rush through it, because it's something I'm going to go over again and again and again, and you'll get so bored of it. You'll be able to kind of intuit how this works, right? So I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to go over to this color channel, and on the word itself, not on the, you know, anything over here, just on the word, I'm going to right click on the word color. And whoa, Maya's hidden a bunch of options in every menu item. So I right click on that word, and I'm looking for this break connection. So why break connection to get rid of that texture? That's like totally counterintuitive, right? Well, not with the way Maya works behind the scenes. So if I come down to the node editor, right, We come over here. You know, again, I'm just sort of rushing through it, right? I'm going to go over to the shading group, right? And we'll look at our connections there. So we've got the checkerboard connected to the Lambert, right? And that's all we're doing when we say break connections. All we're doing is literally just grabbing that and then breaking it, right? So see that? So if I come back here and I go right click, break connection, that's all it does. Just chops that connection between those two nodes. And I can take these guys and delete them. I don't need them anymore. This is another thing that you guys might run into. I like to peel back these little warnings as we go. This is called latent data. What that means is if you're not leave all kinds of junk around, and it'll just make your scenes really slow and laggy. So it's good to, from the very beginnings of learning modeling, to be as clean as you possibly can, right? Which is going to be difficult, I know. I used to have construction objects all over my Maya scene. My Maya scenes looked a little bit like my bedroom when I was a teenager. But there you go. You won't learn from me. You won't learn from the studio system. You'll learn from nights, weeks, months of aggravation and blue screening and why is everything going wrong? And then one day you'll wake up and you go, man, I better keep an eye on every single polygon. So anyway, so let's come in here and assign a new material. So straight away, new material, right? And there's a whole bunch to choose from. The best way to look at it is always just go for the blend, right? So the Lambert, you've seen, it just has no specular reflection, so it's used for things like cloth, things that don't reflect. The Phong is based on a material created by a CG scientist named Bui Tuong Phong. And he's a Vietnamese scientist, and he created the Phong shader, which the industry used for the longest time. And then James Blinn came and created the Blinn shader, which is pretty much an Uber Phong. It just took the Phong shader and made it a little bit better. So the Blinn is just like the Phong. So you just need to grab a Blinn. I know I'm super simplifying it for those of you who are a little bit more CG sussed. But, you know, essentially, the Blinn is a nice overall Uber material, right? So I always try to name my materials. Now I'm going to teach you my naming convention. Studios all have different naming conventions, but it's good to kind of be familiar with one. And I always use M underscore for my materials straight off the bat. So M underscore, and then I'll call this box 1. So I know that that material is related to that box 1, right? And I can do all kinds of stuff like, you know, color it. You know, might want to color it straight away just to remind yourself that this isn't the Lambert 1, right? And I'm also going to take that time to come over here and name my PQ1 as box 1, right? So that's all good to go. Now let's apply a texture. So remember, what we're dealing with now, I'm going to come into my Windows node editor. I am dealing with this. I've got my Lambert material. Oh, nope, sorry. Let's select this box and I'm going to take a look. I'm not going to teach you guys about the node editor just yet. That's why I'm rushing through it, but I just want to show you how things are connected. So we've got the polycube, right? And the object, the shape node, it's connected to the shape node, and we got a shader, right? This is a transform node. It sits out here because it's not really connected to the object. It just tells Maya where that object is in the world. It's at world 000, right? So there's our transform node. Now let's take a look. The only thing that's coloring this box right now is the Blinn shader group. If I go inside the Blinn shader group, we can see the Blinn shader group is made up of my material, which is that dark red. We also see a light linker, don't worry about that. Render partition, don't worry about that. That's towards the end of a project when you're lighting and rendering, right? These guys are the important bits. So this is our shader, and that's our material, right? So I'm gonna come in here, I'm gonna assign a texture to it, and I'm gonna use one of the textures we grabbed. So I'm gonna come over here on the checkerboard pattern for the color. Ignore the other channels. You don't channels in the beginning. It's all about mastering and understanding how the color channel works. So I'm gonna come over here, and there's a few things. You saw me put the checkerboard on. We've got a few different things here to play with. We can put on mountain noise texture. We've got environment, something called procedural textures, which I'll kind of explain to you at a later date. But the easiest one to put on is just a file texture, like a JPEG or a PNG or a TIFF or some sort of image that we found, right? Or a raw thing from our camera, right? So I'll put that on, and I generally name my file node straight away with this time T underscore. So I got M underscore for material, T underscore for texture. So T underscore box 1. That's my texture, right? Sometimes I will also put on the back end of this CM. And CM stands for color map. Oh, actually, I changed that to adopt Mari's naming. Mari's naming is color, right? I'll oftentimes do that because when we start building texture maps, we may have a texture map for some other things other than color, right? Notice we have transparency, ambient color, incandescence, right? These can all take a texture. So if they're all called T underscore box 1, you can see how things can get quite confused after a while, right? So oftentimes the convention would be to go T underscore box 1 transparency, T underscore box 1 ambient color. Those of you who played with Substance Designer and Substance Painter have seen that because it's built into the structure inside of Substance Painter. So that sort of naming convention. So we will try to keep to, actually we'll try to keep to the Substance Painter naming convention because then it'll be easy to go from Maya to Substance Painter. See, you're not going to be staying in one software package. You're going to be moving around. Maya to ZBrush, and then ZBrush to Substance Painter, or whatever it is, right? Okay, so we've got our file texture there, but there's nothing on our box. So why is that? Well, we haven't told the file node where to go. So we can do one of two things. We can click on the folder tab up here. See, I can see straight away T box 1 color. I know that's the node I just made, right? So I can go over here and I can navigate this way. Or, see this arrow plug? What it's basically saying is, look, there is something that I'm plugging into, right? That's what that icon means. You'll see it quite a bit. In fact, just when I had the node editor open, let's just pop this node editor back open. You can see right here, it just means what are you plugged into, what is coming out of you, and what are the incoming outgoing connections. So that's what that symbol means, and it's right there, right? So when I click on this, it does the same thing as switching file tabs. It just moves to the next node down the line, right? And then the next node after that is a place 2D texture node, which we'll talk about in a second. So I'm going to go over to here. This is my file node, and I'm going to navigate to where I put those textures. Now watch this very carefully, right? This is pretty important. I clicked on the file tab, and that's where I ended up straight away, right in my source images folder, because I created a project, right? So now Maya knows where to go. So it's going, oh, okay, you clicked on the file node and you're browsing for a texture. I know exactly where that is, and drop me right into that folder structure, right? This is where it will always go to look for that texture, right? So I'm going to come over here and let's grab that CG box with lighting, and let me put that on. That's cool, okay? So I want that to look like that. So I can't see anything yet, but what just happened there? Right? What happened there? How come the box texture, like what's going on? Do you guys know what's going on here?
Is the scale off or something? I don't know.
Oh no. It's not the scale, but that is something that we do have to consider, right? So let me go back to the wrapping paper metaphor, right? Remember our textures are a wrap. When we take a look at this, you can see it in the sample here. When we take a look at that JPEG, right? Let me see if I can open it up again, right? That has no dimension to it. It's actually a flat piece of paper with a picture of a box on it. So we've actually taken that flat piece of paper with a picture of a box and tried to wrap it around an actual box. And it's not going to work. Does that make sense? Right? So you can see that. It's a picture of a box being wrapped around, right? So that is why, if I come in here, right? I went to that texture site and we downloaded These. Because they're flat, right? This is our wrapping paper, and we'll be able to map it onto our 3D object and get it to look perfect, right? So let's try that. I did grab this one, and there's a reason I grabbed this one, because as a modeler, we also need to know the depth and the shape. Like if I just had this, if I just had that and I'm trying to model the box, I'd ask you, how deep is that? Is it like is it like the size of a shoebox, or like how deep does it go? You don't really know. You could argue, well, I'll know as soon as I switch to like the bottom view or a side or top view or a side view, but still, it's very, very difficult to gauge what that shape of that box is. So oftentimes you'll need one at a 3/4 angle as a reference that you're comfortable with. So you look at it and you go, okay, I get it. I see what that shape is doing. Now I know what it is that I'm modeling towards, right? So this is why I grabbed that. Now, I also grabbed this because I wanted to talk to you about baked lighting, but I'm changing my mind about that mid-lecture because it might be a little bit complicated. The reason why I grabbed this box is it's got lighting on it already, right? Now, I guess I'll go lightly through the concept. If you guys don't get it, I'll show you a practical example the next time we meet. But remember, that's a picture of a box that we're wrapping around a box. It's got a picture of lighting that's baked in. So what happens if, let's go find condition is, it's not even properly UV'd. I won't be able to show you what I was planning on showing you, but let's say we've got that light on a bright area of the box, but the director says, you know what? I want you to light this side of the box. You know what will happen? You'll have lit that box here. It'll have a nice bright spot, but it'll also have a bright spot on the other side as well, because it's in the picture that you've wrapped around the object, right? And again, if that's a bit of a mind warp, I will show you an example next time we meet. But this is why one of the other things that I look for when I'm looking for textures is zero lighting. No lighting in the texture at all. What's called, right? So I'm looking for the purest color of the object with no interference from anything else. No light, no shadow, nothing. So I can light it in a 3D universe. I can have that light animate and it'll look believable. Imagine when you light an object and that light is animated traveling across that object and you see wood, and a bright spot of light and then more wood. It'll look fake. It'll look completely fake, right? So this is why we needed to do this. I get into UV mapping today, but I will show you how we generally tend to apply these objects, right? And I'll do this in a very inefficient way, but I want you guys to understand some concepts, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into this object. Again, that color swatch, it's plugged into this file texture. That's not working for us. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to break that connection. I right clicked on the word color and broke that connection. And we're back to what we're used to. Nice blend material. That's cool, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of those individual images, right, that we got. Source images, raw. And I'm just going to apply them to each side of the box. Now, here's the problem, right? Like I have not properly modeled the box to look like this one. I'm going to leave it like this because I want to show you what happens. It's really sort of important. Now I'm going to use a technique called face mapping. It's probably the easiest but the most inefficient way of putting a texture on an object. I'll explain why it's inefficient, but it's nice and simple, right? Especially for a box. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to right click, grab that face, right? And on that face, I can actually right click and assign a new material just for that face. So I'm going to put another blend on there, right? And for this blend, I'm going to call this M underscore box 1 and then F for front. So that's the front of the box. Cool, right? And it's just that face that I selected, right? I'm going to go to the color swatch now. And I'm going to click on the checkerboard over here. And it's going to open up all these Maya render nodes I can use, but I just want the file node because I'm going to navigate to a file. So I click on this and it gives me this window. I'm going to name this right away T underscore box 1 F for the texture for the front of the box. Then I'm going to head over into the folder and I'm going to navigate to where this guy is, right? Oh, and look at that. I just hit the folder and it just drops me right there. This is beautiful pipeline. A pipeline operates really well when an artist doesn't have to hunt around for stuff. It's just there, right? So that's cool. I'm just going to grab what I want here. I'm going to hit open, right? No object name matches. Why did we error out here? We're getting errors here. 1 second. Oh, there we go. Oh, that was weird. Very weird. Okay, so now what's going on? Holy crap, right? It's like I got that face. I said, I want that texture on the front of that face, right? So I am going to gently introduce you guys to this idea of UVs, right? So up until now, we have just been working with the geometry. Now we need to work the texture, right? So what we are looking at is that wrapping paper glued to the front of the box. So let's take a closer look at this, right? To do that, we need to go into something called the UV editor. So I will minimize my outliner and go into my Windows, and you'll see that they've moved it actually. It's in the rendering editors, I think now. Or did it? No, okay, so it's in the modeling editors. So under modeling editors, you can see that we've got the modeling toolkit, paint effects, and the UV editor is right there, right? So let me show you how this works. Oh, UV toolkit. All right, so here's what we get. So this UV editor is that we're dealing with just a flat piece of paper, right? Now, this outline is our box, our complete box, right? So if I click on the front, it's saying the front of your box is right there. Now, notice we got a few things wrong with this. Number one, Maya still thinks that the box is cube-shaped, but it's not. We've changed it, right? So we need to do what's called UV editing. We need to change it a little bit, right? So there's a few things that I like to do straight off the bat. One, it's sometimes quite confusing. Well, in this case, it's easy because it's just a box. But sometimes it's quite confusing to tell what is a UV and what is your texture. So there are a few things that I do straight off the bat. One is I will turn on the shaded mode, right? So that shades it nicely so I can tell what I'm looking at. Now there's a color scheme for the way it shades things, right? When it's red, that's saying the normal is facing the wrong way. And it's telling you, look, you're actually texturing the inside of the box. I don't know if you want to do that, right? And blue is a perfect UV, right? Perfect UV shell. It's facing the right direction. It's not distorted or anything, right? So that's one thing I like to turn on. The other thing I can do is I can dim down the, whoops, where is the, oh, there it is. So I can dim down the texture. Ah, you get a slider now. That's cool. That's nice. Right? So I can dim down the texture, which again makes it easier to see the wrapping paper that you're dealing with, right? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off the front piece because I just want to deal with the front of the box. I don't want to deal with anything else, right? So you can see that the UV editor has cut and sew and those types of tools. Because again, I want you to remember the Christmas wrapping paper metaphor, right? So let's come in here and let's, okay, so the Shift X. So to cut, I'm going to use the hotkey Shift X. So first of all, I'm going to go and right click and go to edge mode, and I'm going to select edges that I want to cut, and I'm going to hit Shift X. Now you'll notice that suddenly a thick outline goes around that, right? So it means it's made a cut through there. The thin outline means it's just a fold. There's no cut there, so it's one piece. So I'll show you how this works. I'm going to right click, I'm going to select my face here, and now boom, I can take that piece out, right? I can take these guys out as well because they're separate pieces. What happened to my, oh yeah, that's right. So, and the texture is just associated with that face. So what I want to do is I'm going to take these guys and I actually want to move them over to the side, right? I'm going to grab this And I want to work on this. Now, notice there's a couple of things that are interesting for you guys to kind of keep in mind. Number one, notice how Maya only uses this square, the 0 to 1, right? We will come back to that later once we get a little bit more technically proficient, but there are reasons for that. There are reasons why we only work in that one quadrant. And we can also use techniques where we can texture in multiple quadrants, right? But let's just get comfortable with this one area first. So how do we match up our sort of wrapping paper to our object, right? Well, here's where my metaphor kind of falls apart, right? Because what we're actually doing is we're manipulating this shell to fit over the wrapping paper. But you can see inside the viewport, right? What's happening, right? So I'm scaling this guy up, and then I'm moving it over, right? But like the scale is not working for me. I wish there was a better way of doing it. Well, there is, right? I can, again, right click and select an edge, and then I can just move just that edge, right? I can grab this edge and move just that edge, right? And here we go. We're starting to tighten up our texture here, right? Now, this is what I wanted to sort of talk about, right? I'm going to come back over here and we'll look at the texture dimming. And I'm going to turn off the shell coloring for a minute, right? So what's the problem, right? Well, the problem is the proportions of our box, our 3D model box, don't fit the proportions of our texture or our photo reference. So we have something called texture stretching. And it literally means that the texture is stretching like crazy, right? Now, this is not that bad an example, but if we were to try and take that and map it to something that's like super long, whoops. Right? What ends up happening is you get what are called texture streaks. You guys can see that? Right? Those texture streaks, you guys can see that? Right? Those texture streaks are awful. They're horrible, right? What you want to do is you want to get sort of a one-to-one exact match between your object and the 3D object you're texturing, right? So you'll see like in earlier games or games from smaller studios, not because they're not as good, it's because they have compressed timelines and they just don't have the time to do this type of fine tuning and things like that. So oftentimes they'll try to get away with a little bit of texture stretching, right? So now what we can do is now we have two ways of approaching this. One, we could measure the box that we're working with, the texture of it, right? You know, and measure the dimensions across and down and get that perfect. Or we can do what a lot of artists do in a pinch. We can eyeball it. But then you're just kind of like, I think that's about round, right? And you can kind of get reasonably close, right? But it's still sort of hard to tell. It's hard to tell how close you're getting in terms of getting that texture to match on your object, right? Well, this is where a 3D grid comes in handy, right? I don't know if you guys have seen tutorials online of guys modeling in 3D. At some point, they've got like a checkerboard pattern mapped to their object. Have you guys seen that? Oh, God. I must be incredibly boring today. I'm probably sounding a lot tired than I realize. Well, it's here. I'll show you guys. Now, I have my own custom checkerboards that I use, and there are reasons for that, right? But just for today, just for the sake of doing it quick, let's go in here. I'm going to break connections to that texture, right? And I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to put a checkerboard on that now, right? So what does the checkerboard help you do, right? If your checkerboard on your object if each individual checker looks like a perfect square, you're good. You can apply your texture and you'll be fine. There will be no texture stretching. There'll be no distortion. There'll be no warping. It won't look like aliased all to heck, right? You'll be all right, right? So that's what the checkerboard is used for initially. There's also something called texel ratios, which I'll talk about later. But that's what we use that checkerboard pattern, right? And that checkerboard pattern looked reasonably good to me. And therefore, I'm confident that this is probably a good 1-to-1 sort of ratio with that particular object, right? So we want to cut in more pieces to our object. I'm just dealing with the front, just to show you sort of the relationship between the UV editor and the 3D geometry that you're working with, right? So I'm going to come back over. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. Are you able to see the chat? Because people have been typing throughout the session.
Oh no, really? Oh Jesus. Oh man. Oh dude. Okay. Sorry guys. All right. So let's pop into Critter Practice. Man. Oh damn. I got to catch up with all this. Yeah, maybe you can't see this chat. Yeah. Yeah, he's totally in the wrong chat. Yeah, I was.
Would it be easier if we spoke, like, so you wouldn't have to look at the chat, or like, does it not?
Oh, that's kind of what I'm used to. You guys are seriously the first group that I've ever taught that uses primarily the chat window. So.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, but no, it's cool. Whatever's comfortable for you guys, right? I will adjust to you as long as it helps you learn some of the more complex things I'm going through. Yeah, I knew it.
I'm talking better. If I'm like the only one.
Yeah. No, yeah. Don't worry about it. Then it can just be a conversation with you and me. You know, it's all good. I mean, it's all talking about Maya and stuff. So, yeah. Okay. So the other thing I was going to walk you guys through. Yeah, I can see there are a whole bunch of different other techniques. I am being sort of overly complicated for a reason. But to satisfy some of the other guys, I will, after this brief little example, I'm going to flip over into ZBrush for the more advanced guys, right? So you guys who are wrapping your heads around the 3D, just hang on, right? So let's say we want to start cutting into this box. Problems with this, right? First of all, the box it's still ain't, right? Right? So if we come back, the importance of our reference material, right? Take a look at that reference material. We look at that box, it's like, no, it's not right, right? So we still have some issues with this, right? But that's okay. I'm just gonna really sort of, again, roughly eyeball it, about there, but I'm not gonna texture the rest of it. I'm gonna talk to you about how to approach modeling this lower area. So first of all, you can't just guess, right? Because if you look at that texture, you don't know how deep it goes. If I were to look just at that front texture, I'd say, oh yeah, it goes in about an inch or two. But then you go to your reference material and it's like, well, no, it goes in a little bit deeper than that, right? It goes in quite a bit. But what do we do to modify this object, right? There are a couple of different ways we can approach it, but the simplest way to start off with is by introducing you guys to the edge tools, right? So I'm going to right click, come out of face mode, go to edge mode instead, right? So I can select an edge. That's cool. I have all of my edge editing tools, right? So the one that I use most often, that used to be over here, and they've moved it down here because they've got this multi-cut tool, which I haven't bothered to learn how to use yet. But I'm going to go with the tried and true Insert Edge Loop tool, right? So with the Insert Edge Loop tool, notice how my cursor changes shape. If you pay attention to Maya's cursor, you'll never get lost, because the cursor will actually change to tell you if you're inside a tool or not, right? So this sort of, I don't know, inverted Star Trek logo, that means I'm in a tool at the moment. So I'm going to left click, but I'm going to hold it down. And when I hold it down, I can drag my mouse up and down. And I can carefully place that dotted line where I want that break in the texture, right? And there it is. So I want to cut it there, because remember, we need to make folds before we want to do anything to an object, right? Now, here's the problem though. If you're like, oh, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm going to move those edge loops up. Oh, man, that doesn't work. And then we're getting texture stretching. Why is that happening, right? So let's take a look at the UV editor. This is really important because for me, when I first started doing 3D stuff, trying to understand how UVs worked in relationship with everything else was difficult, right? So now, watch this. So if I come in here and I grab that edge loop, right? And I'll go to edge mode. And I move it up. Why is it stretching? Why is it not adjusting? Well, in the geometry, we've moved the edge loop. But on the texture, on the paper, we haven't. So what we're doing in this case is we're taking a wrapping paper that's cut that thin and we're trying to stretch it over a larger part of our model, right? And then in the real world, we'd rip it, right? But in the CG world, it's texture stretching, right? So we can't do that, right? What do we do? Edge loop up there. What do? Well, then you have to also come in here and move that edge up as well. Do you see that? So if I physically move my edge up to a different location on the object, I have to go to my UV editor and move my UV edge up to the same spot on the object. And then the texture distortion is gone, right? So this is a bit of a mind warp. It takes a little bit of getting your head around this idea of how textures work. I know that I'm going off a little bit differently than you'd find on YouTube videos, right? So YouTube videos, they teach you polygon modeling, the extrusions, appending to polys, and you probably spend a good 3 or 4 hours inside of just gray untextured polys to kind of get a shape. I can tell you categorically from experience, one of the big things that we do in studio is we try to get our texture working sooner. We try to get our textures working harder. That's the industry. It means if you got a really good texture, you might not have to model as much as you think because your texture does a boatload of visual work for you, right? So I want you guys thinking in terms of your textures and shaders right from the beginning, right when you're building your object, right? And it's a lot to think about. It's a lot to balance in your head, but it'll make you better modelers in the long run, in my opinion, right? Anyone disagree? Anyone think of a sort of a different approach? Can have creative band practice. What's creative band practice? I think I'm just going to ignore that. Let's see. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, but they're still gamers. I don't know. That's probably from a previous conversation. Yeah, in terms of a way to approach it, may not necessarily be the best way to approach it. And I'll tell you why. Because sometimes when it comes to character sculpting, I would recommend just diving into ZBrush and just doing your character sculpt right off the bat and not think about your texture because it detracts from the creative process of doing that character. But in other cases, I find that it's easier for me to have the texture incorporated straight away, especially if I'm trying to model something that exists in the real world. Wouldn't always depend on the designs that you've come up with. Yes, absolutely. So if you come up with your own, just let me put this one caveat that the technique works when, again, you're trying to recreate something from the real world, right? I find that I use this technique or the projection modeling technique, which I'll teach you guys later, more so when I'm trying to like recreate Wine Street or something like that. My own designs. The most important thing to do when you come up with your own designs is to be as creative as possible, as unhindered and unhampered in your creative process as much as possible. And therefore, if texturing or thinking about the texture at the same time is distracting, then drop it, dump it, right? When I created a game zone, I did all the models and landscape first so I can focus on the modeling. Yes, doing the landscape first is actually quite clever. I find that a lot of people tend to forget that in terms of beginning modelers, because and what you end up getting is a city street that's just on a flat plane that's in perfect grids. In a grid-based, for sale, it gives you a great sense of scale, Oh yeah, chuck a mountain in the background. Oof! It just gives you this wonderful feeling while you're creating a, whatever sort of base that you're trying to create. But yes, definitely, that works really, really well. Certain resolution in the texture images. Yes, I will get to that. Right. And I dropped a hint when I talked a little bit about what's called texel ratios. Right. So you need certain resolutions in your texture. I wonder if I can give a... No, I won't give an example. But next class, what I'll do is I'll take a low-res texture and a high-res texture, map two objects, and put them in a scene. And you'll be like, oh my God, whoa, why does that look so awful? Your texel ratios are off. They don't match. Okay, so approaching this, right? So one of the things I want to do is I want to cut this in, right? So there are two different ways I can do it. Well, there's a few different ways I can do it. So I'll show you all the techniques, right? So if I come in here, I'm going to right-click, insert edge loop. Oh, am I in the right? Let's, yeah. Okay, there we go. Insert edge loop. So I can put this here, right? Now, you guys might be familiar with extrusions. Face extrusions is like one of the most popular construction tools, and I'll show you how this works. So I've cut another edge here, right? So what I can do is I can right-click, I can grab that face, right? And you might be thinking, oh, you know what? I just want to push that in. But it doesn't work. See what happens? Because it's attached to that face, you need more folds for that to be able to work. Now, there's a tool called extrusion. I'm in face mode, so I've gone right-click face mode. If I hold down shift right-click, you'll start to see a pattern. The shift right-click changes your tool selection depending on what sub-object mode you're in. So here I've got extrude face. So here's how extrude face works. I can now pull out an extra piece, right? Or I can push it in. We'll push it in for now. I know it's bad modeling, but I just wanted to point out one of the issues with extrusion, right? So here's how extrusion works, right? When I extrude, it will allow me to pull that face out and it'll create connecting quads so that I have a nice, neat object, right? But you guys can see where it falls apart. If I go inside, it leaves these polygons behind. Look at that artifact and look how it's flickering in black. That means that geometry is no good and the renderer is going to freak out over it, right? So this is not a good technique to utilize in this situation. I'm showing you this because of my jump to ZBrush in a minute, right? So one of the things that I see a lot of younger modelers do is they'll go, well, that's what I want, so that's fine. I'm gonna extrude it. I'm just gonna come over here and I'm just gonna delete these connecting faces, right? And then it's like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, I've created a hole, right? And then you're just like, okay, I've gotten rid of that. Oh, there's another hole, right? So it's very, very difficult to work with extrusions. In addition to the fact that you've got sort of stretching to worry about and stuff like this. Now, let's say we did extrude it in, right? And we're like, oh, I want to delete all the extra faces, but now it's taken some of the faces I didn't want it to take and they're gone, right? So there's another tool I want to introduce you to that's just as popular as the extrude tool. Yep, you can resize extruded faces, but I did this deliberately to show this next tool, right? So the next tool is really common as well. So if we're in face mode, we shift and right click, we have something called, where are you now? Sorry, I have to be in object mode for this tool, right? I'm going to shift right click and we've got append to polygon tool. So the append to polygon tool was one of my favorites. I used it way back when I was younger. So here's how the append to polygon tool works. It just means I can click on one edge, click on the other edge, boom, just draws a quad. Cool, right? So I can come over here, do the same thing here. Whoops. Oh, that's good. It gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about that, what just happened. So let me hit the G key to go back to, the G key is a hotkey that just does the last thing that you did. I find it really, really useful. I know I'm throwing hotkeys at you. Every tutorial on the planet will throw hotkeys at you. So it's your job to catch them. But the G key just repeats the last thing you did, right? So the G key, I'm back into my append to polygon. Click on one edge, click on the other. Now I need a way of telling Maya that I'm done, right? So there's two things you can do. Maya will complete the job and come out of the tool and give you your cursor back, right? But I'm not really done because I want to go to the other side, right? So I'm going to come back. I'm going to undo that, hit the G key. So I'm going to hit that one edge, connect it to that edge. Tell Maya that I'm finished, but stay in the tool. So you hit the Y, right? So the Y completes that operation, but I've still got the crosshairs saying I'm in the append to polygon tool, which means I can come over here and go boop, boop. And then now I can hit enter to come out of that tool. Oh, and that's cool. I've created it, right? There are problems though that happen with that method of creating. It's cool, it works fine. Did that for a long time. Yeah, the whole difference between the enter key and the Y key. Yeah, that's more of a godsend than people realize. Just these Maya does these tiny little things that are really super helpful. Here's the problem, right? So everything's good, but if I come back to my UV editor and turn on my shells, these are the new polygons I just created, and they're massive, and they're like totally in my way, and they're taking up my entire texture page. And it's like, holy cow, I have to deal with these. When you use a creation method that way, right, you're going to create all these crazy new polygons that you have to go into the UV and do all kinds of stuff, right? So that's using extrusion. Now, nothing wrong with it. I still use extrusion and append to poly, and I do that quite a bit when I'm doing mechanical sculpting and things like that. Well, not so much anymore. But let me go back and show you a different technique. You can see how kind of involved it was. So let's undo this back. Hopefully my undo cue is big enough. Should be. By the way, those dragging polygons that are left behind is the biggest problem with the extrusion tool. Biggest problem with the extrusion tool. It creates all kinds of geometry artifacts. But then along came ZBrush. Ha. Okay, so here's another little trick, right? So here's what I'll do. Let me see if I can go back. Yeah. So I'm here. I'm going to right click, go into edge loop mode, right? I'm going to come in, shift right click, insert edge loop. So I'm going to insert an edge loop here, and then right below it, I'm going to put another one in really, really close. Now, if we look at the UV editor, it's mapped nicely, right? I don't have to worry about extrusions or remapping different areas. And then I could just take this face. Oop, I gotta come out of that tool. Take this face, and all I need to do is move it back. Job done, right? And I've added a little bit too much angle there, but you can get like really super close, right? You don't have to re-UV anything, and you don't have to worry about extrusions and cleanup and appending polygons and all kinds of other stuff. So I will show you that sort of in application when we take a look at what I call projection modeling, right? So I'm going to grab these two sides, right? Because I think that they were scaled in. So I'm going to hit the R key, and I'm just going to scale in just on the x-axis, just a little bit, right? Now when I come here, you can see that I've scaled it in, but it's taken the texture with it. And I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to the UV editor. I'm going to grab the edge here. Whoops, I've got to be in edge mode first. I grab the edge here and the edge there. I've lost the texture for reference because it's associated with the face, but that's okay. Why am I not getting uniform? Why am I not getting uniform scaling? It's a bit weird. Okay. Oh, right. Yes, because it's sensing the connecting edges. That's fine. So I'm going to just move these guys in. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. I just want to show you the end result anyway. Right? So come back. There we go. Right? So I know I've gone in closer than my texture, but you guys get the idea. So now I'm going to come out of the UV editor. We've just mapped the front, but let's just take a look, right? So I'm going to turn off my my selection, and there we go. So that's our first texture on the front of the box, right? So I'll get kind of more into that a little bit later in terms of creating the rest of the look of the box. But I'll also show you the benefit of, I'm just going to bring in a point light. And I'm going to go over to my lighting tab and say use all lights, right? And now, well, there's a specular channel on this. Let's get rid of the specular channel. Ooh, and I gotta delete my history. I'm gonna take that specular color, turn it off. Pop into here. Right, so now that surface reacts properly to light, right? And I will show you again by using a texture next class that has lighting baked into it and how god-awful that looks, right? But because I have a perfectly diffuse texture, I can light it the way I want, right? So the way it reacts to light is perfect, right? So that's that. I'm just going to save. Now we'll talk a little bit about saving because this is also an important consideration, right? So I'm going to go to Save Scene As. I'll bring this guy over, and you can see we've got, under file type, two options, Maya Binary and Maya ASCII. Do you guys know what the difference is between the two? Okay. Oh, someone's typing. Yeah, so here it is. The Maya Binary file is compressed. It's like a zip file or a RAR file, right? It's to be sort of efficient. The Maya ASCII file is a little bit bigger, but you can see all the code that makes up your Maya scene. Now, here's where the difference becomes really, really important. If your scene crashes or goes corrupt or crazy, or you're just like, Al, I've been working on this creature dude for like months and now I can't open the file. If it's a Maya Binary file, it's been compressed. There is nothing I can do to help you. If it's a Maya ASCII file, the code will still be there. I can open it up in a text editor and I can find the problem and I can fix it. And then you can open it up again in Maya, right? So Maya Binary is default because most beginners work in Maya Binary. They never want to look at the code. I recommend in your time here that you get used to saving in Maya ASCII. Because there will be a time where you save backup version 6, 7, 8, 9, and then you'll go to open 10, and it won't open. You go, okay, damn, all right, well, I'm just going to have to go back. I did 9 yesterday. I've lost a day's work. I'll open up 9. 9 doesn't open. 8 doesn't open. 7 doesn't open. That's happened to me before, right? It's happened to a lot of people before, right? That's when you're like, Al, can you come take a look at the Maya ASCII? And I'll come over and I'll see what that problem is, right? So, in that regard, I'm going to switch over to Maya ASCII, and then save it as that file format and get used to saving it in that file format. One more point about saving. I'm going to come over to, wow, why is it taking so long? It's just a box. I'm going to go over to the save scene. I'm going to move over to the option box here. Check this out. The option box, just click that on, incremental save, and you never have to save another version again. Unless you want to label it with a specific note to yourself, right? So I'm going to turn on incremental save. That's it. Save and close, right? Now, what it does, I might do initial save, but let's take a look. So what this does is if we go to the scenes folder, yeah, it didn't do it. So let me make a quick change, and I'll hit Control S again to save. And so what Maya does is it creates a folder for you and puts all your versions in there. The cool thing about this is all you have to do is work, Control S, work, Control S, work, Control S, right? You get that habit and it'll just save a running tally of all the different versions. You don't have to do it. You don't have to label it. You don't have to organize it or anything. It does it all in the background, right? So it's one of my favorite additions. That and the crash recovery of CG software. Now, with that done, I'm going to flip over into ZBrush, right? Now, I do have a further ZBrush lecture for you guys that will take you from the ground up. This is just sort of a demo to kind of give you a taste of what ZBrush is capable of. So, switch, and Control N. So, I'm going to come in here. And I'm going to create a TFP, just to get this going, and turn it into a Polymesh 3D. Now, what I want to show you is where ZBrush fits and why people use ZBrush, right? When you've got all these comprehensive tools inside of Maya. So I'm going to come over. ZBrush uses a different philosophy when approaching 3D work. You saw me give you a quick little demo of the sculptural approach, which is just wonderful. But if we come over here and I hit the space bar, we've got the ZModeler brush, which is still selected because I selected it earlier, right? Now, and with the ZModeler brush, I've got too many polys on here. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to reinitialize this Q cube to 1, 1. Right. So I'm going to come in here, hit the F key to frame up on it, right? So I am in the ZModeler brush here, and what that allows me to do is to take that poly and extrude, right? Look how fast those extrusions are. It gets even better, watch. Remember when I showed you, I tried to push that box in, and there's all kinds of artifacting and stuff like that? Well, in ZBrush, you can just push stuff in, and it just eats away your geometry, right? So I can push this in, right? I can clean that up that way, and it's fine, right? So the ZModeler brush has a number of different ways of working on 3D objects. Let me see if I can pull a few of these out, right? So when you hit the space bar inside the ZModeler brush, and again, I'm going through this quick. There's a further lecture later on down the line where I walk through this step by step and teach you. It's just to show you what it's capable of, right? So in the ZModeler polygon actions, I can Q mesh a single poly and I can have things snap to, where's the align, disable triangle snap? No, we don't want, where's the snap and by? Let me try that. Actually, hang on 1 second. Yeah, no, it's eating away the whole object. Oh, where is it again? Is it this one? Might be this one. The extended snap? No. There's a way of setting it to angle snap. I'm just at a loss as to how to do it again. There are certain things you can do, like I can shift select that face. Oops. Oh, what's going on? How come you're not working for me today? Love that when I'm trying to give a demo and nothing's working. So that was just, I can paint temporary polygroups on here. Oh. Right, so I can come through here. So see how I painted the 3 faces there? I can just grab those 3 faces. Oops. Can just grab those 3 faces and then just Q mesh those guys up. Just trying to figure out how to angle snap again. But it's just a really nice sort of intuitive way of working. Now you can do this with edges, you can do this with faces, and you can do this with vertices as well. So you got a few different options and different modifiers. But one of the things I really enjoyed about doing weapons modeling using the ZModeler brush was just how quick and intuitive it was to just get in there and just start blocking shapes out really fast. You don't have to worry about appending to polygons. You don't have to worry about artifacts left over because of bad extrusions. None of that stuff. ZBrush is a little bit more intuitive when it comes to that kind of consideration. So, oh, Gareth, UI can be tough to learn, but it's a very good tool. Yeah, the UI can be very, very hard to learn. You're just in your first year. And again, we'll kind of walk through it really, really slowly. Okay, so that's as much as I wanted to cover because I wanted to really give you guys a clear understanding of the relationship of a polygon face, the shader, the material, the texture, and then the UV, right? And just get comfortable with that, right? What I generally tend to do at this point is give the rest of the box to you guys to do, right? But I understand that not everyone's got educational licensing of Maya just yet. You need to get that sorted as soon as possible, please. Rise and shine. What's that? Yeah. Face mapping, pelting. There's all kinds of different UV techniques that are available that allow you to handle complex shapes. There are different UV tools that are, people might have preference for. My preference is RISM UV, I think, which ended up becoming 3D Labs. What is it called? 3D Unwrap, which Maya bought and incorporated, and it's not as good for some weird reason. But yeah, RISM UV is one of my favorites. I've used, I haven't used Roadkill, but I've used, what's the one? It's a very DOS-tastic one we used for the longest time. Hedis UV Layout. So Hedis UV Layout was one of my favorite ones. Hedis UV Layout, I like that because once you separated UV shells, you could hide the geometry so you could see what you had left over to unwrap and all this kind of stuff. That's a feature I don't see anywhere else. Yeah, there's a lot of different tools to handle UVing and unwrapping a human character or humanoid character is just about as complicated as it sounds. Try to imagine wrapping your buddy up in Christmas paper without any crinkles on the Christmas paper and no seams. And then you'll have an idea of how difficult it is to UV unwrap a character. Oh yeah, my apologies. I don't really know how the educational licensing works, but those of you who've already gotten educational licensing from Maya, yeah, please help the other guys get up. I'd like us to dive into more complex stuff going forward. And I think at that point, you guys will need Maya. You'll need to be inside of Maya. You guys through sort of how to remote into the Uni, to remote pilot the Uni computers as well. But we'll deal with that. Yes, remote connection is currently available. Actually, should be available this week, rather. I think they were doing some final tests on the remote connection. But it's good. It's really good. I think they're trying to sort of streamline it so it's just this web UI. It's just a lot easier to log into. Yeah, student ID is what you use. Yep. Okay, so I know that a lot of what I'm going to be talking to you guys about will be quite dry, on the very, very dry side, but it's all stuff that's necessary. You got to understand we're going to spend 90% of our time as polygonal modelers. You got to understand bits about pipeline and workflow because you'll need to know that stuff when you go into the studio. But we will get to the creative stuff soon. Those of you who find the idea of modeling your own box daunting just out of sheer boredom, please try something else, right? To give you an idea, I was the kid in art class who, when I had to draw a still life of a bowl of fruit, would be drawing dragons and crap, right? So if I give you an assignment like model a box and UV unwrap the entire box, if you are learning and if you are completely lost in the 3D universe, please stick with the box because you'll learn a lot. But if you've already know how to operate inside of a 3D context comfortably, then just make me something cool, right? Make me something cool. I'll give you an idea of where I picked that up. When I was in Vancouver Film School, had a senior compositor from Square Enix. Well, they were just called Squaresoft back in the day, from Honolulu, Hawaii, who just come off the Final Fantasy movie. And he was like the worst teacher, but the smartest teacher we ever had. And every time we asked him for an assignment, he'd be like, I don't know, make something really cool. That was his instruction, which was, I was awesome with it. I was like, yeah, okay, fine. But some people are like, well, what is the assignment? What are we supposed to do? So I'm going to pass that on to you, right? Just if you don't want to do the box, make something cool. Just impress me. I have an innate hatred for 3D modeling, and I don't know why. We will try to turn that into something else. Your innate hatred for 3D modeling exists for a number of reasons, right? Number one, it's not an intuitive process to make a 3D model. Trust me, I know, because I hated it for the longest time as well, right? That's one thing. The other thing is there are so many technical hurdles that you will hit on your way from a box to a character that it can drive you mad sometimes. So this is why I try to kind of pave the road with, look, this will happen, that'll happen, that'll happen. Don't worry, it's all normal, right? Let's kind of get used to it, and we'll get to the point where it's kind of cool. My best metaphor is it's like snowboarding. I know that not all of you have been snowboarding before, but snowboarding is like the worst hell imaginable when you're learning how to do it. You fall down a lot, and it's really, really painful, and it's massively frustrating. But when it clicks, snowboarding is one of the best pastimes I've ever engaged in, right? So it's one of those things. Did a huge paper on it, which made it that much. I'm going to try not to get you guys to do huge papers. I think it's a waste of time, right? Unless it's paperwork that's directly related to the industry. So I may have you do milestones. I may have you do pipeline things, but am I cool to leave? Yes, I'm digressing. I got to leave as well, right? So that's it. Thanks a lot for checking in. I might stare at the ZBrush slideshow for a bit, but then I'll leave you guys. Okay, take care, and we will see you tomorrow, I guess. Cool. I'm glad some of you think it was a great lesson. I felt like I was being like super boring until I discovered I was in the wrong chat. All good. Okay, take care, guys.